Hello, ladies and gents. I'm live on YouTube. I'm Justin Johnson. I'm on the module DD211. I want to influence the youth for today. Young teenagers, mature teenagers, young adults, mature adults, OAPs, maybe come to every life. You need to keep methodical with everything you do. You might, going back to adult education, adult learning, or even university. Giving yourself something to do. I wake up every day thinking, what can I do? Especially when it's cold and windy, you can't go outside. Anyway, so I'm on the module DD211. When you read, it's good to record your reading if you're on Spotify, Castbox, podcast. I'll do mine on YouTube in a minute, but I will be back on Spotify in the near future. Reference your reading. We're on the Understanding Politics, Ideas, Institutions, Modern World, module DD211, like I just said. We're going to look where the book's published because the listeners need to know if the book and the contents come from the same book as them. It's the Open University Walton Hall, Milton Keynes, MK76AA, first published in 2015 and second edition 2022. Copyrighted from the Open University. On page 60, chapter 14, institutional differences between UK Prime Ministers and US Presidents. 6. The power of the US federal limited state differs from the UK unitary, unlimited state. The US president operates within a federal state with a limited government, but the UK Prime Minister operates within a unitary state with an unlimited government. One key institutional factor that empowers the Prime Minister but disempowers the President. It is the structure of the state. The US President presides over a federal system. UK Prime Minister presides over a unitary state, albeit a union state with some features of localism, most recently in regard to the domestic governance of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Federal systems divide power between the centre and the locality, limiting the reach of federal government over matters constitutionally reserved to the relevant state authority. Unitary states place power at the centre, even if formal and informal political requirements require the centre to respect some degree of local autonomy. In UK local government, there is a tradition of central government intervention and direction. Over time, the central government in Whitehall and Westminster, the executive and legislature, has forced down local spending levels and compelled local authorities to comply with certain practices, be they altering education policy, building or then selling social housing. Thank you. Hiving off functions to the private sector or reforming internal structures and management processes, the form of local revenue raising and many of the functions to which it is to be put, and often the rate at which it is set is determined by central government, for instance. The Thatcher government replaced the rates, a tax to fund local government based on the retailable value of property, with a per capita tax called a community charge, but commonly known as the poll tax. However, the poll tax proved both unpopular and uncollectible. So the government, led by Margaret Thatcher's successor John Major, replaced it with a revised form of property tax, the council tax. No such central government intervention would be possible in the US, where the federal government has no say, nor would it wish to exert any form of central control over the form of local revenue, raising or spending at the state level. Page 61. Thus, in comparison with the powers of the UK Prime Minister, the US President's powers are circumscribed in many areas because the fixed US Constitution limits government, preventing it from doing certain things. Being charged with upholding certain constitutional rights that no federal or state government can abridge. The supreme federal and state legislation it deems unconstitutional. The Supreme Court, not the President or Congress, is the custodian of the meaning due under the Constitution. Thus, the Supreme Court has ruled that abortion is permissible. Under the right to privacy granted by Constitution, it upholds and defends gun ownership because the right to bear arms is established in the Constitution. The UK Parliament, led by successive Prime Ministers, has passed laws providing for abortion and restricting the right to own guns. In the UK, the judiciary cannot strike down legislation passed by the legislator. It can merely interpret the meaning or intent of such legislation where it is unclear or contradictory. It is the role of the court to uphold the will of Parliament. In the US, however, the court restricts the will of the President and Congress where this will is deemed to conflict with the rights of citizens and the responsibilities given to the states, as established by the Constitution, working with and through the executive and legislature. Then the UK Prime Minister is able to help change political practice in ways a president cannot. Thank you for listening. I'm hoping to influence others getting into some form of education to better their well-being, their life chances. Page 62. How parliamentary and presidential chief executives are distinctive. Prime ministers and presidents differ because the former is a parliamentary chief executive, while the latter is a presidential chief executive. Both the UK Prime Minister and the US President operate in very different political systems. Table 1 compares and contrasts the two types of chief executive. Prime Minister and President. Elected directly by a national vote, the Prime Minister has no emerges from the Commons majority, being the party leader, being a single party government of the largest party in coalition with another, or being the head of a minority government for as long as the Commons majority does not combine against him or her. With the President, it's yes, subject to having a majority of the electoral college, elected by state and determined by popular vote. Has to be a member of the legislature. Yes, it must be, by convention, be a member of the House of Commons. And with the US, no, you don't have to be a member of the legislature. Cannot be a member of the legislature owing or to a strict separation of powers between executive and legislator. Placed in office by legislative majority. In the UK, it's yes. It emerges from the House of Commons, is wholly dependent on his or her party majority, or else a coalition of two or more parties or a minority and is accountable to it. In the US, with the President, is elected separately and independently of legislator. Table 1, compare and contrast the UK Prime Minister with the US President. We go with the Prime Minister can be removed by a simple vote of the legislator for political reasons. Prime Minister, yes, it can be removed should a single party government lose its Commons majority or coalition government fall apart. The Prime Minister can also be removed from the party leadership by his or her own MPs. With the President, no, the answer is may only be impeached for high crimes or misdemeanours for which a super legislative majority is required. With the term limited as a Prime Minister, you can serve for so long as their party permits them to remain in office or their party retains a Commons majority by itself or in coalition with others. With the President, can only be re-elected once, serving 2 4-year terms in total. With the Prime Minister executive form, collegial, being first among equals, the Prime Minister appoints ministers and leads the government. Ministers, particularly senior ministers, being politicians in their own right, work with but may not necessarily be instructed by the Prime Ministers. All ministers may replace the Prime Minister, provided they obtain the support of the parliamentary party to do so. President, individualised cabinet members have to report to the President and, while able to confer advice, must follow his or her preferred policies. No member of the executive can replace the President, save the Vice President, should the President be incapacitated, resign, or be impeached. The UK Prime Minister, being able to, through the partition Commons majority, to lead the legislature, can therefore often be far more powerful than any president. Prime ministers and their prime ministers matter because they have influence over the legislature. But prime ministers matter more when they have more power and influence within their executive. Presidents are wrongly deemed to automatically dominate their national politics, simply because they dominate the executive. The most powerful president takes a purchase over the legislator. That is enjoyed by the weakest of prime ministers. Should the UK Prime Minister be elected popular and politically successful, then he or she will be subject to fewer checks and balances than his or her counterpart. Heffernan, 2003 to 2013. Thank you ever so much, President Hart. Being Prime Minister can afford a wider authority and influence. US presidents are sometimes able to lead congressional opinion. Franklin D. Roosevelt was able to enact his New Deal reforms during 1933 to 35, but not during 1937 to 40. I've got 5 more minutes reading, I'll be with you. Lyndon B. Johnson could pursue the war in Vietnam, enact civil rights reforms, and introduce the Great Society program of 1964 to 66. Ronald Reagan introduced a radical budget in 1981, and both George H. Washington Bush Sr. and George Washington Bush Jr. were able to make use of military force against Iraq during 1990 to 91 and 2003. Obama supported by Democratic majorities in both the House and Senate. It could pass healthcare reform in 2010, but with no Republican lawmaker supporting the proposal. Such examples are exceptions, however, not the rule. Prompted by national emergency and urgent social concern, these occasions largely reflect the window of opportunity that impelled the president to lead and compelled Congress to follow. But thanks to the UK political system, more political influence is found in a Downing Street than in the White House. In the UK, a strong executive government based on majority rule, plurality elections, and the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty creates the two keystones of the political system. A centralised government, executive power, provided, of course, that the executive has reliable majority within the House of Commons, either as a single party or as a coalition government. In comparative terms, the UK executive is extremely powerful, and so therefore the UK Prime Minister can be powerful. A parliamentary regime is often described as a system of mutual dependency between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Stephen and Sketch, 1994. Page 120. In regard to executive legislative relations in the UK, however, that is not the case. While dependent on the legislator, in theory, a popular and well-resourced Prime Minister-led executive arm with a substantial Commons majority is not dependent on the legislator in practice. Where Baked Hot 1867 claimed England is ruled by the House of Commons, UK is actually ruled by the government acting through the House of Commons, not by the Commons itself. The UK thus calls into question Tories 1996, suggesting that Parliament is sovereign. Thus, parliamentary systems do not permit a separation of power between the government and Parliament. They are all based on legislative executive power sharing. Parliament may ultimately be sovereign, but the UK political system does not share power between the executive and the legislator, provided it has a well-resourced and supportive Commons majority. The Prime Minister-led executive will dominate the legislator. In theory, the UK Parliament is one of the most powerful legislators in the world, able to make and break governments at will, dismissing them from power and office by a vote of no confidence. In practice, although it is sharp-toothed tiger, the UK legislature is weak and reactive. A legislator that chooses never to bite, the tiger is muzzled by partisan politics. The preparedness of the majority party, all parties, to prioritise supplying and supporting executive over checking and balancing it, something which means Commons majority supports its government eagerly and willingly in good times and sad times. Last 2 pages and I'm with you. And it's not going to take me long, so bear with me and we will start chatting. In accessing the role of any chief executive, we can see that 2 phenomena determine the extent of the political influence: their authority within the executive, their dominance over the legislator. Working within a divided government, the US president possesses the first resource, but given the autonomy of the UK legislator, he or she invariably lacks a second. In the UK, the executive as a whole enjoys a second resource as a Prime Minister can, but might not possess the first. This is because the prospect of the prime ministerial influence clearly begins with the executive's domination of the legislature, while the opportunity for the prime ministerial influence is determined by the prime minister's ability to exercise influence within and over the executive. Clearly, power does vary from prime minister to prime minister, and according to political strength, as a particular prime minister has at any given time, the ability of the prime minister to lead the executive varies according to the political context, and each prime minister's strength is determined by his or her personal resources and the use to which they are put. Heffernan, 2003 to 2005. Any prime minister may lay claim to legitimate authority and public prestige, institutional knowledge and expertise, the ability to alter the preferences of the actors and institutions, and a high degree of agenda control. However, to make the most of these institutional resources, he or she needs to make good use of whatever personal power resources they can muster. Such personal resources include identified objectives or political mission, reputation. I'll be with you in a sec. Reputation, skill and ability, association with the actual and incapacitated political success, public popularity, and high standing in his or her party. Such resources, when possessed, provide the Prime Minister with a considerable, if never overwhelming, inter-executive authority and influence, and the opportunity to be a stronger, but not the only, element within the core executive. These resources largely result from the environment within which the actor is located, and they may be provided or stripped away by the political, electoral, ideational and social economic context in which they operate. Heffernan, 2003 to 2005. On the conclusion, this is the last page of the afternoon. I'll come back this evening to read the last 10 pages. The US political system ensures that the president will be in firm control of the executive, but can often have little clout with Congress. Thus, the presidential executive, known that it loses more legislative battle than it wins, has often to fight the Congress. More often than not, the president, unable to get his or her way, has to bargain and compromise with Congress, and more often than not will still not get his or her way for the policy that it is agreed to be by the president and Congress, then to be enacted. It has finally to pass muster with the Supreme Court, which is charged with determining whether such policy is permissible under the rights and responsibilities set out in the US Constitution. By contrast, the UK political system can enable a well-resourced, popular UK Prime Minister to use a secure parliamentary majority, a supportive, pliant executive, and a unified party to accumulate far more unchecked power than can any US president. Prime ministers have to share a degree of power with other executive actors, but provided they are electorally popular and politically successful, they are, being better resourced in terms of their functions and executive legislative agreements, more authoritative than any US president. Whoa. Lovely. Just what we ordered, wasn't it?